Happy Saturday, parish orphans. Today, I'm bringing a lot of material together, and I don't want folks to look at this episode later and think that it's something like a recycled footage show. Remember when The Simpsons, which when I was a kid was my favorite show, would do recycled footage shows? They'd make some jokes and ironic commentary about the fact that, hey, look, we're doing a recycled footage show. That's not what this is. And I know I'm not protesting too much. Instead, I've been thinking, collocating info, and gathering what it means that for the first time in really 60 years, we have an influx of new young persons, particularly young men, into the church. For the first time in 60 years, probably more, 70, 80, 90. And a lot of them were not around in the late 20-teens when many of my viewers learned a lot about the reason for my posture within the church. And my posture within the church goes like this. I get the question a lot. I'm critical, very skeptical, very dismissive of the modern hierarchy in the magisterium. But I'm completely dismissive of sedevacantists, even recognize and resist SSPX types. So the question that I note from people that I always kind of assume that Catholics who follow me on Twitter know why my position is what it is. But I don't think that's really true. And it came to my attention recently. So a lot of converts or reverts, particularly young guys, a lot of them are, good young guys with good politics, healthy masculine energy. A lot of them are groypers, come back into the church within the last 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4 years. They'll say, how are you, talking to me, so dismissive or critical of the current magisterium and hierarchy in the church without being sede or even very philosophically incoherent SSPX adjacent type? There's a good answer to that. And for once, what I can say is I'm a moderate. I don't often use this term, the M word. Most moderates are what I call militant moderates in my book, Rules for Retrogrades. I'm not a militant moderate, but on this one position, I end up being moderate because I have this view that is critical of the hierarchy, but say it's complete, it's legit without being good. And there is an explanation for it. The answer to such a thing is historically manifold. And today's show is going to be a synopsis of that justifies it. And anytime I've ever troubled in real life or IRL in person, when somebody meets me to lay this out for them, they find it very compelling. And I think you will too. So there's a historically manifold answer, and I just want to get right down to it. It's a Saturday show. We all want to get to our Saturdays, barbecues, picnics, things like that. So we're going to do that in a second. It's a combination of the strong justification for papal minimalism that comes from Vatican I, the third secret of Fatima, which I did a show on most recently this week. And if you haven't seen that, go see that show, that episode. It's really important to what I'm saying today to ground it. So it's Vatican I, papal minimalism, particularly coming from the Relatio of Bishop Gasser, the official interpretation of Pastor Aeternus, Fatima's third secret, the Sankt Gallen Mafia, and the character of Bella Dodd and the School of Darkness. Those figures, to get those kind of four things, justify and adumbrate what I'm going to be talking about today. And then there are these three other apocryphal trad accounts. Traditionalists like to talk about them. Historically, they're far less secure, that lend a little bit of contour to the story. The 17th, 16th, and 17th century apparition of Our Lady of Good Success, far less secure in its messaging, but it's not completely negligible. That's number one. It's kind of apocryphal. Our Lady of La Salette, another apparition, approved in one way, not approved in another, just like Our Lady of Good Success. That's a 19th century apparition, middle of the 19th century, 1846. with an amendment by the seer 3 decades later in 1879. And then the semi-apocryphal account of the 1884 event, which supposedly, though not verifiably, led Leo XIII to draft the St. Michael prayer event. Together, all 7 of these things, the latter 3 are really not secure. Really, you can't set your weight on them. These 7 things ground a strong account for why we ought not to be shocked when the 20th century papacy and magisterium, including common bishops, seems and is so corrupt, both personally and doctrinally. So that's really important. That's what today's show is. And I think you'll be, if you're a new viewer or a new revert or a new convert, I think you'll find this compelling. And let me tender up front the disclaimer that the latter 3 items, good success, lost Salette, and the event leading allegedly to the composition of the St. Michael prayer, have only tidbits of truth in them. A lot of them are traditionalist exaggerations. And I'm a trained lawyer and philosopher, so I go through and I like to source stuff. But the first 4 reasons I'm going to talk about today, Fatima's third secret, Gallen Mafia, Bella Dodd, and her role in the communist implantation of 1100 phony Fugazi, a lot of times Homo sapiens and Marxists into the priesthood in the 1930s, leading to events like Vatican II, together with papal minimalism coming out of Vatican I. This grounds the view of the modern church that I have. We're going to get into it. I'm going to do it as fast as I can because I've done deep dive shows on almost each one of these things. What I really want to do today is run through each of the 7 items and then synthesize why each one is so important. First, let me say this. You need to be in a red state. If you're a conservative, if you're a Christian of any stripe, get out of your blue state, get to a red state. Today, I prefer the blood red swath of states between Texas and Florida. Do so today by going to realestateforlife.org. Get, like I did, out of the bluest of the blue, get to the reddest of the red, or if you're not in the bluest of the blue, but if you're in a blue state, get to a red state, realestateforlife.org. Please do support this channel. You can see it with every single episode we do. It's absolutely unique, right? Traditionalist, but not LARPy. Relatable, but not liberal or lenient or modernist. In the world, but not of the world. And this channel's 4 pillars. Every show we do is related to one of our 4 pillars: subsidiarity, patriarchy, right-wing community organizing, and re-education into the old education. You can see it. There's no other show on YouTube like it. And we have a boutique sort of mid-sized audience. We need your help. It's a viewer-supported, a viewer-driven program. Do so on Locals, because we're truth tellers here. I tell the truth. That's what I do. And I've been kicked off of Patreon for telling the truth. I've lost jobs. Go to Locals, Rules for Retrogrades, Locals, and support there. At the very least, subscribe to the channel because we're trying to hit 100,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. Leave a comment, like the video, etc. Let's just jump right in because I don't feel like doing a very long show. I want to do a synthesizing show. So the basic call of the question is, how are you, Timothy Gordon, so dismissive and critical of the current church and its hierarchy, all the way up to the tippy top of the papacy, without being SEDE or SEDE adjacent or SSPX or SSPX adjacent or what? Orthodoxy. Oh yeah, or leaving for orthodoxy. Yeah, even more extreme. Because I get these calls every day, and you know, probably you first learned my name on Taylor Marshall's channel doing anti-Pope Francis shows, saying essentially something that sounds like recognize and resist, but then people found out, no, I'm not in any way SSPX adjacent. So how are you not a normie, but not a weirdo or whatever, not a normie, but not really fringe? This is how it's got. essentially 7 parts. The first 4 parts are really, really strong. So let me see how quickly I can go through them. First off, the real, true, and only way to interpret the papacy in a true Catholic way, through a truly Catholic lens, is through what we call papal minimalism. The Pope can speak dogma into existence, but he's done so only somewhere between 2 and 5 times in 2,000 years, only 2 verifiable times, the third and fourth Marian dogma. And the rest of the time, we do not want a Pope who is a lone ranger. We do not view the Bishop of Rome as any kind of oracle. He doesn't get extra powers that he didn't have, that he didn't take into the office. Likewise, a bishop doesn't get extra power. I mean, there's an extra charism, but he doesn't get extra natural powers that he didn't have as a regular priest. And a regular priest, aside from his charisms and his ability to consecrate hosts into the body, blood, soul, divinity of Jesus, doesn't have extra natural powers that he didn't have as a man. Charisms don't mean powers. And this is important because Vatican I in the 1870s was the first time, strangely enough, that the powers of the Pope and the powers of the bishops were actually supposed to be laid out. Very strange, right? Because we'd had this big kerfuffle, big fight, big schism with the Orthodox 800 years before over, well, what are the powers of the Pope? Seems like we would have had Vatican I tended to the definition of the limits of papal power long before. It's kind of strange we didn't, historically speaking. I don't mind admitting that. But it's the 1870s, relatively recent, the penultimate ecumenical council, second to most recent one. So that's odd. I'm fine admitting that. But here's the thing. The Franco-Prussian War broke out and suddenly ended the council. It didn't actually end until right before Vatican II. It was still technically going. They just disadjourned. And they'd only done one half of the goal of meeting. The half that they tended to first was laying out the power of the Pope. Okay, he does have this ex cathedra power to define dogma in, out of thin air with a word. But he's only done it twice that we know of. And so that's that. So you have to define something first. The power of the Bishop of Rome is what they tended to first, because he's the tippy top of power. But they were going to get to, okay, now what's the power of all the other bishops, the whole rest of the college? They didn't get to this. And so Vatican I, if you read Pastor Eternus, it's lopsided. It's very plainly lopsided. How do we know that it wasn't intended to be lopsided? Besides just this historical view that, as a matter of fact, it was interrupted halfway through when they'd accomplished the Pope half, but not the Bishop half of the adumbration of power. Well, the official spokesman of the Deputation de Fide, the one charged with giving the official interpretation and explanation to the other bishops of what Pastor Eternus was going to be, was a man named Bishop Gasser. And he gave what's known as a relatio, or a special intervention explanation, on July the 11th, 1870, to try to say to the bishops, don't worry, this is nothing new, what we're saying about the Pope with this ex cathedra power in Pastor Eternus. Ex cathedra is a rare power, and it's only been used twice, specifically and precisely because a Pope has no lone ranger. He's not meant to be a lone ranger. He has no lone ranger powers, even though that seems to conflict, or oracular powers. He doesn't know special things. So when he wants to declare something about the way that the church has always been, because the church can't change, he wants to rubber stamp it. What he's going to do, as he did with both both Piuses, who rubber stamped ex cathedra, the third Marian dogma, and then 100 years later, the fourth Marian dogma, what they did both times was polled all the bishops, polled them, Polled, and said, is this what has always been taught in your diocese? Each bishop is something of a historian of his own diocese, an intellectual historian. Has this been taught all the way from Christ to the disciples? If yes, then let me know. The Pope It's laid out by Bishop Gatzer in the Relatio that he's not a Lone Ranger, even though he seems like a Lone Ranger, because he's supposed to do this polling thing. He has no oracular power. He's not enabled by Pastor Eternus or the Roman Catholic Church to make up stuff that wasn't the case before by the ex cathedra rubber stamp. The rubber stamp is just saying, this is a fast track to magisterializing a teaching. We can't get all the bishops and cardinals together for an ecumenical council right now. And yet the Pope has, as the head, the kind of special power to fast track it. We need this new dogma without a council. But he's always going to poll first. He has the moral obligation, maybe not the procedural obligation, but the moral obligation to poll first. This is the full interpretation of why the Pope is not what Protestants and Orthodox and secular people think he is, especially with the ex cathedra power. What is it? Canon 212. We're allowed to criticize the Pope. The Pope, when he's not speaking ex cathedra, can and has been wrong unless he's operating together with all the bishops. It's just not what you've been told it was. I don't just mean by secular and non-Catholic press. I even mean by Catholic retards who have embraced this autocratic Lone Ranger view of the Pope because that befits their political agenda and they like that kind of thing. It's all wrong, whether it's a Catholic or a non-Catholic that have pitched Roman Catholicism papalatry in this fashion. It's wrong. The official deputation de fide, interpretation, explanation of Pastor Eternus was given by Bishop Gatzer with the permission of Pius IX on July 11th, 1870. And papal minimalism is the way. Papal minimalism is the way. There are three competing factions, and at Vatican I, in terms of the extremity of the papacy's autocracy, it was the middle group. Essentially, the far fringe minimalist group were essentially conciliarists. Yeah, that's a condemned heresy. That's basically orthodoxy. The far papal maximalists were the ones who seized upon the historical anomaly of what I explained at the beginning, having only the papal powers laid out without having the bishop's powers laid out. And they famously, the papal maximalists who wanted the Pope to be this autocrat, propagandized people after the Franco-Prussian War and the functional close of Vatican I. And they essentially won out in convincing the Catholic world and the non-Catholic world that the Pope is some sort of autocrat and Lone Ranger. He's not. He's not. Go read the Relatio of Bishop Gatzer on July 11th, 1870. It is the official interpretation of the forthcoming Vatican document, which would be Pastor Eternus. So right away, this is just functionally, we have a Catholic answer for what's our attitude to be with regard to the Pope. Okay, the rest of these other six answers are historical. Normies would call them conspiracies. They're really not. But we have at first a kind of procedural answer to the call of the question. Why are you being critical, Tim, of popes and bishops who seem to be really evil over the last 100 years without becoming a sede or even SSPX? Well, this is why. Because the church teaches papal minimalism. The church teaches that we're allowed to criticize the Pope this way. And when we have a run of bad popes, we haven't had a really, truly super faithful traditional pope since Pius XII. Just like the sedes say. But they think all the popes have to be minded as if they're autocrats or Lone Rangers, or every pope has to be a saint or something like that. That's not actually what they believe, the latter part. But they talk as if they believe that. It's not true. We had runs of bad popes in the Middle Ages. We've had a run of bad popes now. No, Benedict XVI was not a conservative, definitely not an arch-conservative, not even really a moderate. He was a leftist, and we have had all modernist popes since John the 23rd. You get bad runs sometimes. That's bad luck and bad luck, and those are the breaks. But now the 6 historical things I want to talk about show that it's not just bad luck. This was in design, in manufacture, in design, and foreseeable for centuries beforehand. I don't want to talk too much about item number 2, the third secret of Fatima. Go see the last show that I did, the last episode, if you want great detail, because I did, I think, a bang-up job bringing out, coaxing forth, inviting investigation by the readers, and providing plenty of historical detail. Why Fatima's third secret is more or less apodictically, morally, at least, certain in terms of its non-complete revelation by the church. It has not been revealed by the church. Basically, the 3 secrets of Fatima are the 3 parts of the secret. Each had a visual part and a textual part. Mary gave actual words for each of the parts. This has been verified. You can verify it in 4 or 5 ways. And the first 2 secrets have part A and part B, visual and textual. The third secret was supposed to be revealed in 1960 by John the 23rd, the first of our bad popes, the one who changed what Vatican II would be about. Vatican II is no longer, according to John the 23rd in 1958, 59, it's no longer going to be truly Vatican II, meaning take up the unexpressed part of Vatican I that I just mentioned, explained the relatio of Bishop Gasser as what Vatican II was supposed to be, because the Franco-Prussian War kept Vatican I from getting to it. And let's just make it about aggiornamento, updating the church, basically modernizing the church. Well, you have to have a quorum of people. You have to have a minimum of at least centrists, if not center leftists, together with a cadre of far leftists in the church to make Vatican II happen. Well, that's what they had. John the 23rd got into power. Therefore, he hated what the third secret of Fatima probably really was, didn't reveal it in 1960, said in a February the 8th, 1960 document, we're never going to release this. They got pressured by world press over the next 4 decades to release it in June of 2000. And what they released in June of 2000 was only secret 3A, the visual part of the image. This is likely. And they never gave the words of the Virgin Mary, which definitely were there. Sister Lucy said there were words of the Virgin. She said so about her cousin Francisco. It's implied by her, etc., when she started giving the first line in Portugal, in Fatima, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. There was more to come. The words of the Virgin were never shared. And why were they never shared? Because of what the content of the secret was. One of the most faithful cardinals in the church was Luigi Ciappi, and he said what the third secret was. He read it himself. It's about the apostasy from the top in the 20th century, not just at Vatican II, but before Vatican II, where basically the faith would be mostly lost on earth from the top. Now, he didn't say anything about a sede vacante, because there hasn't been a sede vacante. He just said that the bishops, he implied strongly that the bishops and the popes for a time, we're living through it, would be stumbling blocks. He didn't say they wouldn't be bishops and popes, or they'd be anti-popes or anti-bishops. He read it. He implied very strongly what it was. Also, Father Malachi Martin claimed to have read it. He was undersecretary to Cardinal Bea, and he implied the same thing. Also, Cardinal Odie, a friend of Cardinal Ciappi, was consulted on it. He said it was the same thing, apostasy that began from the tippy top. That's what, so they did not say word one about we're going to have a bunch of anti-popes. We're going to have an Avignon-type papacy like we had after the Great Western Schism, leading to and during the Great Western Schism. They didn't say anything about that. They would have said something about it if that's what it was. We don't have a sede vacante. They didn't say there's going to have to be secret chapels of real Catholic faith like SSPX. They didn't say that. They just said you're going to have bad leaders that lead the flock away from the faith into an unofficial apostasy. That's what the third secret of Fatima is. I'm 99% sure. This is verified 4 or 5 ways. The strongest way, well, second strongest way, I already mentioned the strongest way you can know this, is because Our Lady told the seer, Sister Lucy, in 1917, when she asked her, why can't I reveal the third secret right away? And she said, well, because it won't be clear to average Catholics what the meaning of the third secret is until 1960. And the Vatican later says in 2000 that the 1981 assassination attempt, which would have been not clear at all in 1960, was the real interpretation. The assassination attempt on John Paul II. That's nonsense. That is verifiably stupid. That is verifiably wrong. What would have been clear in 1960? We got this new modernist Pope, John the 23rd. He just called the new ecumenical council. He just said the purpose of it is aggiornamento. And even though it was originally called, or being talked about being called by Pius XII as Vatican II, the extension of Vatican I, the Bishop Gasser thing, which is very important and kind of accidentally related in my analysis, they totally changed it. It's not really Vatican II. It's a whole new, when you call Vatican 1, 2, 3, it means they're all on the same topic. This is not on the same topic. There's one line in Lumen Gentium that deals with papal power. There's like one line. It's just on modernizing the church with a capital N, M. And in 1960, this had just been released in 58, 59, so the people would know, oh, if the third secret read an apostasy is coming from the tippy top, they're going to know to look out for this 1962 ecumenical council that had just been recently announced. That's Fatima's third secret. Supposed to be released in 1960, not John the 23rd would always call the Fatima seers prophets of doom and gloom. He hated the secret. Why? Because he was a modernist liberal. He wanted to get on to singing Kumbaya and gay Protestant folklore music, which they put into the churches. This is also why, this is not only why I critique the popes, but I'm not a Sede or even SSPX. This is also why I'm fine if I'm on a lazy Sunday and I don't want to travel an hour and a half to the TLM, which is certainly better than the Novus Ordo. Well, I'm fine. Hey, I got to satisfy obligation. I got to get my family to Mass. I don't really want them to see or take in any of what's going on at a Novus Ordo, but I got to satisfy Sunday obligation. So I'll go to a Novus Ordo. Everyone just sort of close your eyes. We're there to worship the Eucharist. We're usually not going to receive the Eucharist. We're just going to worship it. That's your duty on Sunday. So I have this moderate position that's not really characteristic. I tend to be on the fringes. And I guess one of the impetuses to doing this show was in a recent stream by Nick Fuentes where he was making fun of convert Catholics that collect devotions and private prayer practices that he said were like Pokemon cards. Everyone jumped on his case. It sounded a little flippant, but I got where he was coming from because it is a phenomenon that is particular to converts to Catholicism from Protestantism. They have a lot of the Martin Luther-esque nervous habits. Like, oh, I have these 15 devotions I do every day. Now, everyone that has 1 or 2 favorite devotions is not collecting Pokemon cards. When you're not LARPing, then I think it's great. I legitimately do love the rosary, but I do find it convert-esque. And I did on TNT when my co-host would always go, hey, you're not on the team unless you do a daily rosary. No, that's not how it works here, man. That's how it worked in Protestantism. It doesn't work that way. If it's not a precept of the faith, we have 5 precepts. If you don't have to do it, you don't have to do it. We can't make stuff up. So I was sympathetic to Fuentes' message, but I was like, a lot of the younger Catholics, probably in his audience, that are recent converts or reverts, doesn't really matter whether they're a convert or a revert, might not understand the TLM is objectively better. But they're right about the fact that TLM goers are no better than Novus Ordo goers. This is a similarly moderate position to what I'm saying about the Pope. The popes have been bad since Pius XII, since after Pius XII. And we can criticize them, but I'm not saying. The Novus Ordo is terrible, but it's a real mass. It's objectively terrible. It was done with the real authority of Rome, but it's terrible. And therefore, I do not feel comfortable being like, well, I can't make to a TLM this week, so I'm just going to skip. No, this is where I'm in between. I'll just go to a Novus Ordo this week and kind of plug my nose. See, this is why. Because you can get runs of bad popes who will gatekeep good people from getting into the priesthood, by the way. I want to talk about that at the end. And they have. They kick seminarians out for two main things. Still today, kneeling before the Eucharist. I know lots of guys this has happened to. People out there in the audience know lots of seminarians that have been kicked out for kneeling before the Eucharist. And number two, belief in the real hell. Those are the two main things that they are weeding out because they've been gatekeeping for about 100 years. And Our Lady was trying to tell us this was going to happen in 1917. Before Vatican II. Vatican II made its stuff a lot worse, but it was bad for about a century before Vatican II. Let's get on to item number 3. Bella Dodd. Bella Dodd, an American, half Italian communist who worked with and for Stalin during the 1930s. She claimed she was tasked with emplacing 1,100 gay men, Masons, Marxists into seminaries. When she reverted to the faith a couple decades later by Archbishop Fulton Sheen, one of the best bishops in the middle 20th century, she told him in his living room, I personally did this. It's a confession. I emplaced 1,100 baddies, homos, Marxists, Masons into seminaries. And she said 4 of them are very, very high placed in the cardinalate right now, at the highest places. She didn't say the Pope, but she said in the highest places. I have always felt pause, a little bit of anger at the late, great Archbishop Sheen for what he told her next. Do not name names. I don't understand that. He advised her strongly, do not name these names. I don't get it. I don't. You need to name names or else it's not real. She testified before the Senatorial Un-American Activities Commission and said some of this, but not as explicitly. She wrote her confession in her book, School of Darkness. Yes, I am placed all of these commies and Masons and homos in the seminaries. They got very high. And that was in the 30s. And this set up a gatekeeping system and a personnel as policy set of expectations for the 1960s when they had Vatican II. So Vatican II did, as a matter of observable fact, make stuff way worse. Trads are always talking about this. You know, they changed the Mass. They changed the breviary. They got rid of the Leonine prayers. They got rid of the St. Michael prayer. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Literally, they got rid of the Leonine prayers. They took crucifixes out of the Jesuit universities. The Land O'Lakes Agreement. They made Catholic education horrible. They feminized it. They did 100 bad things. They had priests start to dress in their civvies. They changed the clerical garb away from the cassock. They did all this stuff because lex orandi, lex credendi. And the fact of the matter is Vatican II did make stuff worse. It got way worse after the Vatican II disciplinary changes took effect in the late 60s, 1969, especially the Mass, the main change Vatican II made. Had no female doctors in the church until after Vatican II. Now suddenly we have 4, but women can't teach in churches. What? So much bad happened. But guess what? This is what I always told trads. It did get way worse after Vatican II, but it began before that. How did they vote with a great vast majority on all of these bad provisions at Vatican II? By emplacing bad guys into the seminaries in the 30s. Bella Dodd attests as much. It was part of a confession. Fulton Sheen believed her. I believe her. Sorry, it's just a fact. She was being as specific as she could possibly be, aside from naming names. And for some iniquitous, historically mysterious reason, Fulton Sheen told her not to name names. I am going to be curious about that if I'm ever able to confront our Lord in paradise. I'm curious about that one. Why did he tell her that? So that sets it up. Now, Pope Leo XIII had himself 30 years before 1930 said bad guys are being flooded into the seminaries. The seminaries are bad. So this brings us back to the last decade of the 1800s. There's an apocryphal tale about the generation of the St. Michael prayer, which I just mentioned, one of the Leonine prayers. It's a mini exorcism. Used to be said at the end of every single mass, and weirdly enough, they got rid of it. These liberal popes, Paul VI and John the 23rd. It seems kind of naked. Seems kind of open and honest. Well, this prayer was composed in 1886. Now, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it in 1 second, but it's part of the three historical reasons that are not nearly as strongly grounded as Fatima's third secret or Bella Dodd's testimony, or what I'm going to talk about in a second, the Sankt Gallen Mafia. So let me revisit the St. Michael prayer event. And then we're going to be working backward in history. And what we're going to see is there's some limited evidence that seers in the church and mystics knew that something would go terribly wrong in the late 19th, early 20th century of the church, as far back as the 1500s. But that's a more limited evidence. And the St. Michael prayer event is part of that, along with two other apparitions that are not as easy to interpret as Fatima. Fatima's a tangle, but it's fully approved, and we can tell what's going on, even though the corrupt church member being told on by it, including popes, the corrupt churchmen, prelates, being told on by the third secret, bungled the cover-up such that we could basically tell what the third secret is. So I'm saying Fatima's complex, but it's not that complex. Bella Dodd's story is relatively clear. It's a little bit of a tangle because for some reason Fulton Sheen told her not to share. Don't share the names. That's troubling. Now, the fourth reasonably solid, verifiable historical anomaly that tells us why things happened the way they did in the 20th century is the revelations that came out by Cardinal Gottfried Daniels in 2015 about the Sankt Gallen Mafia. Another confession by one of the bad guys himself. And he said, look, in the 90s, in the 1990s, 96 specifically, we liberals in Northern Europe, in Northern France, Belgium, Switzerland, started meeting, he said, yearly in Sankt Gallen, Switzerland, to plan out how to canvass a non-Ratzingerian succession to John Paul II. Everyone assumed Cardinal Ratzinger, the CDF, John Paul II's right-hand man, would be the successor. They ended up being right. But the Sankt Gallen Mafia was a far, far left radical group within the church, not unlike the sort of Marxist implants by Bella Dodd, who would meet, and he simply, he and others told too much about what they were doing. They're doing illegal stuff that has been illegalized by canon law and by popes to avoid a Ratzingerian papacy. Not because Cardinal Ratzinger was a strong right-winger. He was a liberal. He was one of the two men who changed Vatican II from being truly a continuation of Vatican I into being a modernization council, along with Karl Rahner. He, Ratzinger, and Karl Rahner, two strong liberals in the church in the 60s, gave us Vatican II. You know, I mean, the outcome also involved the caucusing and deliberations at the 3.5-year-long council itself. But Ratzinger, along with Karl Rahner, are the two men that changed Vatican II's program, schema. So he's not an arch-conservative, but he did come to the right a little bit. He came to his senses a little bit. And same thing with John Paul II, also a Rahnerite originally, came rightward a little bit. So we look at those as our two most conservative post-conciliar popes, and neither of them is a conservative really in any meaningful sense of the term. All you have to do is look into their histories. They're both lefties, they're center lefties, and they're just more to the right than John the 23rd or Paul VI or John Paul I or Pope Francis or probably Leo XIV. So we talk about them like they're arch-conservatives, but they're not. So the Sankt Gallen Mafia is a tangled web where Cardinal Gottfried Daniels, who's now dead, a bad guy, very bad guy, pro-abortion, Belgian cardinal, very powerful man, one of the kingmakers for Pope Francis, told all in a biography where he said we had a mafia club. We would meet from 96 to 2004 to avoid a Benedict pontificate because we thought it would be, even though he's not a conservative, it would be too conservative. We want to remake the church. They were friends with Theodore McCarrick, who later said he conspired with the Sankt Gallen Mafia to kingmake Bergoglio, who became Francis. And he said the whole talk in the air was Bergoglio can remake Roman Catholicism, can remake the papacy whole with even just 5 years. And a good guy, Cardinal Walter Brandmuller, said the goal is going to be communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, which was the first thing Francis tended to. Women deacons, the homosexual lobby, very pro-body, all the stuff that Francis was working on, he only accomplished 1.5 of those. But we know that's what they're doing. We've verified it a bunch of different ways. We know so much about the Sankt Gallen Mafia, even from Giulia Maloney's excellent book. It's verified every which way. And several admissions by the members. We know Achille Silvestrini. We know Cardinal Carlo Martini, the original Don of the group, who was supposed to be the Francis, but he suffered Parkinson's and had to step aside. We know Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, whose private undersecretary was the biographer of Pope Francis, you guessed it, who is the one who admitted that Francis agreed to being canvassed for in the first edition of The Great Reformer. His name is Austin Ivory. I battled with him on Twitter. He had to take that book off of the shelves because he made an admission that could have invalidated Francis' entire pontificate. I'd have loved to have seen that thing looked into. There are other members of the Sankt Gallen Mafia, and it's basically what you would expect to see. The leftists gatekeep so that they will not let even a centrist into power after Vatican II. They got in power in the early 20th century, and they were planning Vatican II, and that's why we haven't had the furthest right-wing pope we've had is Benedict, and he's left of center for a Catholic. It's just a fact. And they talk about this at great length. You know, and Giulia Maloney accounts in her book, basically, the conclave which gave us Benedict saw a lunchtime meeting when the votes for Benedict were frozen with votes for Bergoglio, who a name no one even knew at the time in 2005's conclave. that he was seen walking with his arch nemesis, Cardinal Martini. They seemed to strike a deal. And afterwards, the scrutiny immediately after lunch was all of the Sankt Gallen votes went for Benedict. And there's all kinds of indications where Martini and Silvestrini were saying in the first years of the Benedict papacy, it's going to be a papacy of surprises. It's going to be a short-lived papacy. They somehow knew that Benedict was going to retire. Was this a deal? Likely so. You'll do something for a few years, you'll get out of the way, then we're going to get our Bergoglio, and he's going to be the great reformer. And now we've lived through that. So why was I so comfortable for 11 and a half years criticizing Pope Francis? Because was he a real pope? Yeah. But we know from Fatima, Bella Dodd, the Sankt Gallen Mafia, Bishop Gassler's intervention, that this can happen. Now, the three far less secure items that sort of help to give contour to the picture, but they're not so dependable, are predictions about what would happen in the early 20th century to the Roman Catholic prelacy, College of Cardinals, College of Bishops. One is an apparition at Quito, Ecuador, called Our Lady of Good Success. Now, the devotion and the image have been affirmed. So Our Lady of Good Success is a real thing. In the cloistered Conceptionist convent of the Immaculate Conception in Quito, Ecuador, it's long been venerated. It's accepted by the church. On February 2nd, 1611, the then Bishop of Quito solemnly blessed or consecrated the statue, making a formal ecclesiastical recognition of the devotion. A novena book to Our Lady of Good Success exists with an imprimatur from the Archbishop of Quito, Ecuador. This shows that it's a real thing. The local church allows and promotes this devotion as a legitimate Marian devotion. The abbess of the Conceptionist convent, Mariana de Jesus Torres, did exist. The image of Our Lady of Good Success, you can go look at it online, holds the child Jesus and a crozier and keys and is placed above the abbess's chair in the convent choir. Now, the message of Our Lady of Good Success is what is disputed, and you're going to see the same thing in the La Salette apparition I'm going to talk about next, and then I'm going to get back to the St. Michael event, which allegedly led Pope Leo XIII to write the St. Michael prayer in 1886. There's no formal declaration that the Holy See, that the apparitions witnessed by Mariana de Torres are worthy of belief. According to Catholic Answers, this is a good way to frame it. The problem with authenticating the apparitions is that there's little information. The apparition is accepted, but there's debate regarding how much of the tradition is original and how much has been added over time. Now, trads love adding that the message goes like this. Many of the narrative details, dates, dialogues, mystical phenomenon have come from later popular sources rather than contemporarily documented archives. And so you need to proceed with caution. The prophetic message is attributed probably later to Our Lady of Good Success are this. A significant portion of the messages claim to foretell events of the 19th and 20th centuries, like a Masonic takeover of the hierarchy, which did seem to happen, a church crisis, widespread sacramental abuses, things like the main thing you're going to get kicked out of seminaries for in the 20th and 21st century is being a straight man, right? Kneeling as you receive the Eucharist, that's the main thing. Belief in literal hell, sacramental abuses. These are found in devotional literature and popular books. Now, because the underlying primary source manuscript, it's called the Quadernon, is either lost or not fully published, and because the church has not issued a formal evaluation of these specific prophecies, their authenticity remains private and for devotional usage only. Some scholars caution about later additions or exaggerations. Now, there is a lady in South America who I believe has a PhD. She seems like a kook to me, named Dr. Marian Horvath. I've heard lots of strange stuff. I haven't verified it all, but she's one of the main ones that adds, hey, and trads love repeating this, that Mary said, the Virgin Mary said in the 1500s, hey, in the middle 20th century, there's going to be a Masonic takeover of the priesthood. It's going to be a lot of homos that flood in the middle 20th century into the priesthood. There's essentially going to be a low-key apostasy, or a high-key apostasy, I guess, in the priesthood. The seminaries are going to be gate-kept. They're only going to allow bad people in. Bella Dodd type stuff, but like 400 years before, 450 years before. It's impressive if it were time-stamped. If you had a chain of evidence there, it would be really impressive. Some of the more extraordinary claims, like a nun dying 3 times, specific references to future dogmas, are treated skeptically in academic, research-oriented Catholic commentary. But I will say this. You can rely on the devotion. It's valid and approved locally. The apparitions are not necessarily. The statue and its veneration are genuine and old. The many prophetic statements of good success, Our Lady of Good Success, were not approved at the time. The novena with imprimatur is legitimate for Catholics to pray, but using the prophecies as if they're certain future events is not. Now, there are components of Our Lady of Good Success, its messages, which are not verified, that were leaking out in the early 20th century. So over time, so that is still prophetic seeming. I'll say that. They don't go all the way back to 1611, which is the first place where they're writing down what was happening in the 1500s. So they're not solid, but a lot of them are being added. The supposed prophecies from Good Success were being added in the early 1900s. Before this stuff was as plain as the nose on my face, right? So there's something to it. I mean, I've seen versions of the message at the apparition where they say the priesthood's going to be corrupted, and it'll be kind of generic. I've seen where they say the priesthood will be corrupted in the seminaries and it'll be gate kept, and it's a little more specific. I've seen versions where they say the Masonic sects are going to filter in the 1950s and 1960s, and it's super specific. Trads are unfortunately very bad record keepers and are exaggerators. Now, I mean, I'm a trad, but I don't like the addition of apocryphal facts. They're not helpful to anyone. They make us all look like liars. And it means that you have to asterisk the message of Our Lady of Good Success. And that's unfortunate, because if it was real, the message, and not just the devotion and the image, then that's 4 centuries before being called. Being called correctly 4 centuries before. That would be powerful. But we can't claim we have that win when we don't. Now, lots of parts of the message seem to be from the early 20th century, before everyone knew what was going on in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. So it's still borderline prophetic, but what do we do with it? Now, there's a likenability between Our Lady of Good Success, 1611, and the apparition of Our Lady of La Salette, which originally happened in 1846. It's an approved devotion like Our Lady of Good Success, which also has a non-approved part of the message, even an indexed, outlawed part of the message, which was added by the seer 33 years later in 1879. Now, the indexed, proscribed part of the message from 1879 does seem to not only back up what people claim was said at Good Success 2.5 centuries before, but was early enough in 1879 to successfully call the Bella Dodd stuff, the pre-Vatican II stuff, the post-Vatican II badness in the church. So you weren't allowed to read the updated La Salette message, but it seems to be kind of true. But still, I don't want to get in trouble. So here's what happened. It's an approved devotion, original to 1846. The apparition and the shrine at La Salette, France, are approved by the local church, and the statue is venerated. However, like Our Lady of Good Success, the prophecies of the apparition are not officially recognized as supernatural or guaranteed by the church. The messages of Our Lady of La Salette include warnings about here's the very specific part of the message that's allowed by the church. Don't work on Sundays and don't take the Lord's name in vain. That's approved by the church. They say that's what La Salette was about. That's weird. I'm not saying these aren't big deals. Don't work on Sundays. And definitely don't take the Lord's name in vain. The stupidest, easiest way to wind up in hell is to be in the habit of saying JC or OMG. So I think that is important, and it makes sense to me that Our Lady would appear in 1846 and say, cut this out. Do not say OMG or JC. That's taking our Lord's name in vain, and it's a mortal sin. It's the stupidest, least payout mortal sin ever. It's not even a fun one, right? So just don't do that. And don't work on Sundays unless you have some exemption to do so. But there's an unverified part of the message that the seer seems to have added 33 years later that does not seem, that was, as a matter of fact, added in 1879. It's not like they're only trads claiming it in 1979 when it was obvious what happened in the church in the latter half of the 20th century. The prophecies, like a crisis in the church, sacramental abuse, loss of vocations in the 20th century, vocations only to homos and Marxists, are not verified by the church as supernatural. And the secret messages later by this lady Melanie Calvat in 1879 were actually condemned by church authorities for their apocalyptic tone, what they called anti-clericalism. I know that could be just the same thing or the equivalent of Pope John the 23rd saying he doesn't want the message released because it identifies him as the bad guy. But if the book was actually indexed, then we don't know what to do with it. The Holy Office restricted promotion of the extended secret versions. So that's something. But also, to be fair, the fact that 1879 is when it first appeared is not nothing. In both apparitions, Good Success and La Salette, there's a core experience, vision of the Virgin, call to repentance, that's accepted, approved by the church. In both La Salette and Good Success, there are later messages, especially those involving detailed prophecy, strong criticism of the 20th century church, really early into mid-20th century church, pre-Vatican II, moving through Vatican II, were not approved or even in the case of La Salette, explicitly disapproved later. So there's a high degree of similarity between Good Success and La Salette. There's also a high degree of apocryphal usage as a kind of proof text in traditionalist circles. You'll see, cool looking internet memes with a quote from Our Lady of La Salette or Good Success, where it's just like, boom, in the 20th century, specifically in the 1960s, the priests are all going to be homos. They're all going to be in this. And then you go check it and it's not verifiable. Both of these apparitions' later messages have been taken by some traditionalist Catholics to justify concern. I mean, I have concerns about modernism, concerns about Freemasonry, concern about this church crisis, this worst church crisis ever. The fact that you get kicked out of seminaries for kneeling before the Eucharist. This is a fact. I know. I have friends that have been kicked out of seminary for kneeling before the Eucharist. Diocese to diocese. There are homos gatekeeping the church. And it doesn't mean that they're a false bishop. It means they're a stumbling block. Actual bishop, just who's a bad guy, which can happen in Rome. The Bishop of Rome can be a bad guy. Look at Francis. Remember what this show is. It's a justification to the younger men who have recently reverted or converted to the church. And I'm saying, here's where, for once, I'm a moderate. I'm a trad who's like, yeah, we have to call out the inaccuracies of Good Success, La Salette, I'm going to get to the St. Michael prayer event in a second. But there's also the really rock-solid terra firma of Bella Dodd's testimony in the 1950s about what she was doing in the 1930s. Cardinal Daniel's and other guilty parties' testimony in the late 20-teens about the Gallen Mafia. The third Fatima secret. We know a lot about it. And of course, all this plays nicely with the true meaning of Vatican I, which was papal minimalism. So we need authentic texts, of course. This is obvious. But Good Success and Lost Salette, both over a century before the crisis they were calling out, did have some elements of truth that were called out well before the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. So there's something there, even though they're goofy. The original manuscript, remember, at Good Success, called the Quadernon, has not been fully published. Melanie, when in the case of Lost Salette, Melanie's 1879 publication diverged from her earlier versions and lacked ecclesiastical approval. So there's always that problem. But there's the lingering problem of that's an 1879 text that talks about stuff 100 years early that sort of echoes Good Success, but that really echoes Good Success is 250-year-old concerns about what the hell is going to go on in the prelacy, the episcopate, in the church in the 20th century. Not just the mid-20th century, but the early 20th century. So you have that. Okay, and as a final instance of a not wholly nonsensical trad repeated story is the event leading to the generation of Pope Leo XIII's St. Michael prayer. The long version is really interesting, by the way. That prayer that we say, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. Do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. That's the short version. I mean, it's 15%, 10 to 15% of the original length of the long version. Look up the long version. There are some more clues in the long version that maybe this story, this apocryphal story I'm about to share, I mentioned it earlier, I want to get more into it now, is not wholly nonsensical. Sort of like there's limited evidence at Good Success and Lost Salette that while trads have embellished the specificity of the prognostications, it's not wholly nonsensical. You have that in the long version of the St. Michael prayer itself also. So the origin of the St. Michael prayer, composed by Pope Leo XIII in, I think, 1886, is surrounded by a popular apocryphal tale, especially beloved by traditionalists, which claims that the Pope had a vision of Satan there in 1884. I don't know why it's 2 years before 86. Satan asking God for either 75 or 100 years to destroy the church. It's a widespread tale. It's not historically verified, and it's not found in any official documents by Leo XIII. I'm going to unpack this. But it echoes the one of the oldest books in the Bible, Job, where the devil is sort of bandying with God. Hey, I want to prove to you how easy it is to turn your people against you. Give me 75 to 100 years of darkness, especially easy time, and I can turn all your priests, bishops, and even the Bishop of Rome against you, or something like this. It's not an exact tale because it's popular lore. Here's what we know. Pope Leo XIII should be a saint, I believe, so I keep nearly calling him Saint Pope Leo XIII. He composed the original St. Michael prayer in 1886, ordering it to be recited after low masses throughout the world as part of what is called the Leonine prayers, which the Vatican II popes canceled. It's weird that they canceled this. You know, this mini exorcism at the end of every mass. They're like, no, don't do that. They also canceled the oath against modernism. Did you know that? The Vatican II popes? Forget whether it was John 23 or Paul VI. That's odd that every theology or Catholic philosophy teacher in a seminary or a Catholic college had to take an oath against modernism, the cans are like, no, we don't want to do that anymore. That's weird. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. The prayer, you know what the prayer reads. I just said it out loud. It was never part of the Mass proper, but it was always said after the low Mass. It remained in use until 1964 when the Leonine prayers were suppressed. That would be Pope Paul VI that suppressed it. So yes, Pope Leo XIII did write the prayer and it was officially promulgated. What's apocryphal about it? Well, there was a cardinal, a high-ranking cardinal, who told a tale of this apocryphal version of the tale. According to the tale, widely circulated but not historically verified, around 1884, Pope Leo XIII had just finished celebrating Mass when he suddenly collapsed, going into a trance-like state. Witnesses claimed he saw a terrifying vision of Satan asking God for 100 years, 1884 to 1964, 75 to 100 years, asking God for 100 years to test the church. God allegedly granted this time of trial, echoing Job. Horrified, Leo supposedly went straight to his study and composed the St. Michael prayer on the spot, then ordered it to be said after every low Mass. The story is dramatic, vivid, spiritually sobering. It's compelling, interesting, could be put into a movie. And it's often cited to explain both the prayer and the rise of modernism, apostasy, and church crisis in the 20th century. It makes a lot of sense, right? It does. I don't appreciate, though, if it was largely embellished by trads. Now, it wasn't made up by Jim traditionalist layman out of the blue. Here's the most we can trace about it. Despite its popularity, the story has not much solid historical documentation from the time it allegedly occurred. Here's what church historians say about it. There are no verifiable documents from 1884 that mention Leo XIII having such a vision. The first written accounts of this event leading to the St. Michael composition appeared decades later. The earliest known version of the story appears only in the 1930s, roughly 40 years after, long after Pope Leo XIII had died. This account comes in 1933 from Cardinal Nasali Rocca, who said Leo's private secretary told him the story. But it's secondhand hearsay. It's not even Cardinal Nasali Rocca saying, I was the guy that saw it. It's a guy, Cardinal Rocca, who said that Leo's private secretary at the time told him the story. So it's secondhand hearsay. The Vatican never confirmed it. Now, again, we have a conceptual catch-22, right? We have a conceptual catch-22 with all of this stuff, even including the more verifiable third Fatima secret. That for the Vatican to vouchsafe the truth, the veracity of any of these historical accounts of what the hell went wrong with the church in the 20th century and still now, where you're going to have this goofy new Mass where you get rid of the St. Michael prayer, you get rid of kneeling, you get rid of the Latin, you make it a clown Mass, and you're kicking priests in droves out of the seminary because they revere the Eucharist too much. You have all these accounts, and if the church were to verify it, they'd be telling on themselves. So it's sort of a catch-22. It's uniquely sticky quagmire, because if it's true, it's a liar's dilemma, liar's paradox. The bad guys whom the story tells on are not going to be like, yeah, that's true, that's me, John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, whoever it is. But it's a paradox because if it's not true, it's not true, and they're not going to say it's true when it's not true. There's no papal document, diary, papal encyclical that hints at the vision. The St. Michael prayer was published and promulgated in 86, but with no reference to a vision. Now, go read the longer version. There are some, if it's true, maybe some hints more than in the short version of the prayer. Everyone should go look at the long version of the prayer anyway. Pope Leo XIII was worried about modernist creep into the church in the late, even, in the late 1880s and 1890s. That's what the prayer is really about. an infiltration of the church. Also, I haven't included today, I probably should have included it, the permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita. Maybe I'll do a review show on that, recycle some of that material. But that also was an intercepted document in the middle 19th century, 1800s, by Vatican Secretary of State, showing that the Marxists and Masons were going to take about 100 years and try to infiltrate the seminaries because we don't have the CIA's vetting power, right? Just with bad guys, and surround the Pope with a college of cardinals who are just telling him bad stuff. This also seems to be a fait accompli. It's called the Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita from essentially a Masonic lodge, the Carbonari, or is it P2, who they intercepted this tale, this communique. And many of the popes, beginning with, I think, Benedict XV, Pius VIII, Pius IX, Leo, took it seriously and thought it was important. They did not, because these were not your modernists, they were ordering people to read it. And they were writing encyclicals, particularly Leo XIII, about the dangers of these infiltrators. So I could have included the Alta Vendita on this list as well. Remind me if I forget, and I'll do a show on it soon. But the basic point is you have liar's paradox. You would be asking a bad pope to tell the truth about how he's a bad pope. You would be asking pro-Vatican II goons, if Vatican II is as bad as people say it self-evidently seems to be, to talk about it. Yes, can you confirm this? This is as bad as we think it is. Okay? So that's the kind of whole count. I should have included Alta Vendita, but I'm not going to do it right now off the cuff. There'd be some things I want. And so when you take that whole ball of yarn, Bishop Gasser's real relatio, you can go read this from Vatican I. We are not papal maximalists. Fatima's third secret, Sankt Gallen Mafia, Bella Dodd's testimony, Our Lady of Good Success, asterisk, asterisk, Our Lady of La Salette, asterisk, asterisk, the St. Michael prayer event in 1884, asterisk, 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 and maybe no asterisk besides the permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita. And you have everything pointing at apparition, prophecy, warning that the church would fall into its worst crisis ever, where the Pope and bishops are basically real popes and bishops, but are bad guys for a run of time in the 20th century and would lead people into error, lead people into apostasy, stumbling blocks, to use Jesus's term. Judases running the church, homos running the church. You know this is true. You know your bishops in many a diocese, just not a straight guy. You know this is an old queen. Let's be honest. We know how bad this problem was. I can tell you the stories I've heard from Camarillo, seminaries in California, avocado orchards at night.
Will you take some super chats?
Yeah, super chat. Let's do it.
I think one of the other questions I saw was that why people might be wondering, well, why stay Catholic if all this is true?
Look, I'll answer that question, but to me, that's a really dumb question. The church is the church. Why? Can I ask you, why would you leave? I just went through, when did I start this? I did an over 60-minute episode with providing in every line the answer. If the church is the church, if Jesus required a St. Peter in a college of bishops and binding and loosing that requires ordination of not only priests, but bishops and a head bishop, there's no other Christian church on earth, right? Protestantism's not right. Orthodoxy is not right. That we have the four marks of the church from Nicaea, one Holy Catholic Apostolic, because can we interact some? But don't just drop this retarded question and then disappear. It's a retarded question.
I think like a lot of that critique is coming from mainly the Orthodox, who are saying that
I guess so.
That there's corruption within the church, so therefore go to to Eastern Orthodoxy.
But that's so weird because the Orthodox are always like, yeah, so many of our patriarchs are corrupt too, but we just don't have the maximalist claims about the Bishop of Rome you guys do. And I just told you, we don't have maximalist claims either. What we do have that you guys don't have is the 4 marks of the church. It's one holy, Catholic, apostolic. You guys can't even pretend yours is one. It's like 14 plus. You guys can't pretend you have the moral philosophy of the apostles because they were strongly against divorce and remarriage, strongly against contraception. I mean, all the stuff that I spent, most of my summer debating, my friend Jay Dyer preparing to debate him on twice, once at the beginning of the summer on Tim Pool, once at the end of the summer on Elijah Schaefer's show. Both compelling debates. But there's no reason to leave.
I think a lot of Orthodox guys are, they're surprised how little interest you have in Orthodoxy because of the stance that you have against the corruption in the Catholic Church. So from their perspective, they're I think, thinking that, well, Orthodoxy is close enough. And of course, they think that it's more correct on many stances. But they'll always say this to you. They're like, oh, you'll convert. Like, he will not.
Look, I'm not trying to be mean. Papally maximalist Catholics say the same thing, but hoping that I don't convert. They'll be like, oh, dude, if this is your view. They were saying this to me in the first years of the Bergoglio Francis pontificate. Like, oh, you're on your way out the door, man. You talk this way about your own pontiff, number 266. I am going nowhere. And I'm not saying it to be mean to papal maximalist Catholics or to Eastern Orthodox or to sedevacantists. Those are the 3 main groups. I guess SSPX as well, though they get it more that you can kind of stay put. They just have a philosophically incoherent view of obedience. Because you're not allowed to ordain your own bishops and things like that. But mainly the 3 groups, sedes, EOs, and normie papal maximalist Catholics. They all have different hopes, but they all share the premise that basically today's show can't be justified. Everything I've said in today's show can't be justified. And I'm going to say it not meanly, but just as a matter of fact, it is an IQ gate. All of them ask, well, why be Catholic? Even the Catholics are like, if you're not a papal maximalist, why be Catholic? Because the church is not papally maximalist. Because our documents are not papally maximalist. Because Vatican I doesn't require this. Because papal maximalism could never work out. You might luck into one really saintly pope if Jesus knew, because he knew, that the church had to last one generation without him, without his Omega, without the Perusia. But if that's to last 267 popes, that means you're going to have some really crappy popes in there.
And that, to me...
And that's the point.
That's what's actually given me more faith in the Catholic Church. I know a lot of people have fled the Catholic Church for orthodoxy because of the corruption and with the pontiff and the things that are going on in the hierarchy. But for me, I've actually gotten more faithful to the Catholic Church through this because God has preserved his church, even when we have, corrupt bishops and pontiffs even that are trying to subvert it. It's like our church stands strong, and that only happens through the grace of God.
Vatican I papal minimalism, my friends, is what vouchsafes the conceptual and dogmatic integrity of the Roman Catholic magisterium in a way that papal maximalism never would. The church would have exploded the first week of Francis's papacy, or before that, long before Francis.
Not to mention the
it's an IQ gate. That's what I'm saying. That I was kind of trying to put off. That's me. It's an IQ gate for papal maximalist Catholics. Sorry, there's just retardation there. For EO, they just can't get it. Why not become EO? Because it's not the full church. It might be the eastern lung of the church for the first 1,000 years, but Jesus instituted a papacy, so you can't have the full church there.
And they'll say Muckies, and I'll be like, yep, Muckies, exactly. That's one of the 4 marks of the church. Sorry. I know and
same thing with the sedes. It's an IQ gate. They're like, Tim, the sedes get more frustrated to me than anyone. They're like, you sound like us. The last really faithful pope was Pius XII. Dude, everyone who's being honest knows it. Not John the 23rd or Paul the 6th or John Paul I or John Paul II or Benedict or Francis or Leo XIV. I don't know when we're going to get a good, faithful Pope again, but it's a punishment. It is a punishment.
A just punishment.
And it's a just punishment for us. It doesn't mean they're fake popes. It just means they're shitty popes. And we've had shitty popes before. It's an IQ gate. But the new mass is so tacky. That's a punishment. Doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean those priests, a lot of whom are homos, can't actually consecrate a host into a Eucharist. They can. And that's the one thing you go to mass for, because I can read the gospel on my own. You go to mass, even in a Novus Ordo, if you can't get to a TLM that weekend, to worship, bow yourself down before the Eucharist, even if you don't receive it that week. That's your obligation. It's one of the precepts. It's one of the 5 precepts. You don't have to do a daily rosary. I suggest it, but you're still on the team. You do have to go to mass to be on the team. You can be on the team without doing a daily rosary, though it's really good to do. And I submit it to you. You should. It's a great practice, but you don't have to. You do have to get yourself to at least the Novus Ordo on Sunday, and you don't have to receive every Sunday, but you definitely have to bow down on your knees and worship Jesus once a week. That's one of the 5 precepts of the faith. Okay? But it's an IQ gate. Settings are like, dude, you sound so much like us, just come over. EOs say, you sound so much like us, just come on over. Papal Maximalists say, you sound so much unlike us, you should just cross over and be a Sede or an EO. It's an IQ gate with all 3 of them. Do you see how? This stuff that I did this show on, it's real. I mean, I don't know about Good Success, La Salette, the event leading to St. Michael prayer. That stuff has elements of truth, though there are huge majority elements of embellishment by trads. And I've been very frustrated about those 3 because I used to take those 3 seriously. Mm-hmm. But the Alta Vendita, Bella Dodd, Sankt Gallen Mafia, the Third Secret of Fatima, those things are facts. And they play really nicely with the true Catholic conception of ecclesiology. There's a pope. He can be a bit of a ranger, but he's not a lone ranger, and he's definitely not an oracle. He doesn't have special powers of divining things out of thin air. He has to pull the bishops. Ex cathedra is just a procedural fast track that still needs to be trusted yet verified, and that's why the Pope pulls bishops. And that's why we can critique him, because he's not some oracle. It's not like critiquing Jesus. It's not a little bit like critiquing Jesus. He's a man. He's a man, okay? We have to respect the office, and sometimes that means respecting the man, but sometimes it doesn't. And it's an IQ gate for you guys, whether you're Catholic or you're Orthodox or a Sede, to figure out when does it mean don't critique the man and when does it mean you do critique the man when you respect the office, the chair.
I like what you said about accepting the punishment that God's giving. Clearly, right now is a time of punishment with the bad popes and a lot of the corruption in the church. What's interesting to me is that people, they don't seem to want to accept God's clear punishments. You know, they always want to flee from them and to protect themselves. And right. To me, that's very spiritually immature. If you're uncomfortable with what's happening in the Catholic Church, welcome to the club. But it sucks. It sucks, but it's the truth. And there's been many times, like when I've thought about like my just battles with feminism, for instance, where it's like I wanted to protect myself and to make excuses for myself or find safe harbor for some of my very bad ideas. But it does come down to spiritual maturity to say, you know what? No, I'm not going to shield myself from discomfort or from punishment. I'm going to embrace that and I'm going to accept it, because if this is what God is designing for us right now, to have this time period where our popes are very bad and things are very uncomfortable, then I want to embrace that with my whole heart and accept God's punishment if that's what he thinks that we deserve. And I really do try to live my life like that. I'm not easily swayed from the Catholic Church, because I notice that this is what the Eastern Orthodox have. It's like, I have yet to see something that's an affirmative reason to join Eastern Orthodoxy outside of just like, well, look at this scandal in the Catholic Church. And I'm just like, yes, I get it. I know.
It's just high church Protestantism. It's just more respectable 2,000-year-old Protestantism,
Right.
or 1,000-year-old Protestantism that goes back the previous year. But I mean, you guys accepted the Pope before for 1,000 years. So
there's a challenge in chat, and he says, "How is it apostasy when Roman Catholics popes say Eastern Orthodox Church is the other lung of the church, and we are sister churches?" LOL.
Well, LOL was the first 1,000 years. It's just us saying it's a real church when you have bishops and sacraments, which Cardinal Ratzinger clarified. So it's a real church, and for the first 1,000 years, it was really when it was common practice during the first millennium, LOL, to refer to different cities and areas and patriarchates, churches as churches. It was clear that there was Rome, and then there was kind of the Eastern churches, the Greek, Turkish, Alexandrian, Egyptian churches. And even then further than that, you had the Oriental Orthodox churches that were kind of doubly Eastern. Then there are the Eastern Orthodox. I mean, they go back to the apostles. We never claim that that orthodoxy was made up out of whole cloth in 1054. The way Protestantism's just a freaking joke. It was made up in the 16th century, beginning with the preformers in the late 15th century. It's just a joke. Protestantism's a joke. It is you are historically illiterate if you're a Protestant. As of now, it doesn't mean you can't come correct. That's not what we're saying about the Eastern Orthodox churches. They have this history, but the goofy part, LOL, is that for 1,000 years you guys accepted a pope. It waffled at times around 800, and then again, waffled a couple times. But you guys accepted a pope for 1,000 years, and you're like, yeah, we need to have the pope. And then 1,000 years in, you're just like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We don't like it. That's the LOL, my friend. The joke's on you.
It's very, to me, like, I am trying to be respectful to our Eastern Orthodox brothers because we get along with them quite well. But to me, I genuinely don't understand the appeal. Like even just as a Catholic wife, like, I believe in the patriarchy. God established the patriarchy in the Christian household and in our structure of the church. The Pope is the head of the church. The husband is the head of the family. That applies even if your husband, let's say, is not Jesus Christ. If he's not perfect, if he makes mistakes, like, a wife is still supposed to honor the office of a husband, the patriarch of the family, and is supposed to try to do what he says and to try to love him as the patriarch of the family. So yes, even though we have had bad popes, I love with my entire heart the office of the papacy. Like, I respect that. It was what Christ instituted. And even though we have imperfect popes or very bad popes, that does not diminish my respect and love for the patriarchy. That makes me love it even more, because that's the challenge. It's easy when you have a nice ruler. You become a better woman. I've talked to lots of women whose husbands have various issues. They have a drug addiction problem, or they're not working as hard as they should. You become a better Catholic woman whenever you're under the yoke of a husband who isn't doing his best job. I'm going to start becoming a dick and make you a better Catholic woman. I just mean that you appreciate it. It's good for the soul to be tested. We don't always need to be fleeing for comfort. No, you're never like that. That's not true. I just mean, I don't understand how Eastern Orthodox, they don't, I know, of course they'll say Christ is our head, but that's like girls saying, well, Christ is my boyfriend. It's like, that's not how this works. Like, we have earthly leaders. Christ instituted the papacy, and that's how it is even in a Christian household. Your leader is imperfect. He's going to make lots of mistakes. He's going to annoy you. He's going to make bad calls, and yet you remain in a hierarchy where there is a head. And I find great comfort in that, even in times like this, where we have, very imperfect head. So I genuinely don't get the appeal at all. And I've yet to hear anything other than just dunking on the Catholic Church that's an argument for why I should abandon the Catholic Church for no patriarchy. Yeah. I don't get it. Open to hearing it. Never heard one compelling rejoinder. And I see a lot. I don't know if this is fair, correct? And I do ask for your correction if I'm being uncharitable here. But I think a lot of well-meaning people who are very faithful that want to be Catholic. It seems to me that if they have they didn't necessarily have their morals in order, many divorces, contraception might be an issue, then the second safest place to land is Eastern Orthodoxy. But for people like you and I, it's like I don't have a need for it if I'm, not shopping around for a church that'll accept my maybe not so pristine moral past. You know what I mean? So it's like when people are telling you or I to convert to Orthodoxy, I'm just like, we have no need for contraception. You and I don't have a need to, have the church sanction prior divorces or any of that. There's just absolutely no need for it. And I'm not trying to be uncharitable to our brothers and sisters in Eastern Orthodoxy. I'm just saying that that's just an honest observation I've had, where it's like Eastern Orthodoxy becomes a second best option if you can't make it to Catholicism.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's a solid sort of grounding, which is what we're attempting to do with today's episode, is ground people in our scale, to show that our conception of the church is uniquely scalable. Mm-hmm. Our version of, not the church, but of ecclesiology is uniquely scalable.
Sorry, we have a few more super chats to get through. Did Pope Francis change any doctrine besides the teaching of the death penalty? And what about Amoris Laetitia?
No, he did not change the doctrine on the death penalty. He changed the catechism, and he changed the catechism in language that is only prudential. But the catechism is not the magisterium, so it's not doctrine.
It's a summary, right? So it's like if you buy like a chest of drawers and you get like the instruction manual, what I mean? It's like a summary of what you need to do to put this thing together properly. Right. That's what the catechism is. The
closest thing, this is a pretty close call to changing doctrine he did, was Amoris Laetitia, the post-synodal apostolic exhortation on communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, and the implication of that, which is a corollary, would be that it's not a mortal sin to get divorced and remarried. Amoris Laetitia chapter 8 is the closest thing, because he put his interpretation of chapter 8 6 months after publishing it into the Acta Apostolica Sedis. So that's the biggest problem with Francis. And I said at the beginning of the Leo pontificate, I knew Leo was a bad guy because of who emplaced him. Sankt Gallen guys, Cardinal Supich. I need to do a show on the elevation recently of Cardinal Supich. But I knew he was going to be a bad guy. But I was trying to be like, okay, I'll show that my view is falsifiable here. If he's a good guy, he'll get rid of Amoris Laetitia, because that's doctrinal and it matters.
Next super chat. Did you ever release your debate debrief on papal infallibility, Tim? Also, how divided metaphysics can be explained via church's magisterium? For example, Western Rite Orthodoxy versus Eastern Catholicism. This is by Abraham.
Sorry, did I ever release the debrief on
your debate debrief on papal infallibility?
Yeah, it's there. It's the second show. I went through the 3 debrief shows right after I got back from Florida after I debated Jay. So just papal on the papacy. It might be the third one, the second or third one. What was I didn't understand the question.
Second part of the question. Also, can and how divided metaphysics can be explained via church's magisterium? For example, Western Rite Orthodoxy versus Eastern Catholicism.
Sorry, I don't understand what you're calling metaphysics. Yeah, I don't know what you mean. Metaphysics doesn't mean probably. You mean liturgy? Metaphysics is very different. It has very little to do with theology. But I could say that the Eastern rites were allowed within Catholicism as a kind of concession to keep Eastern Greek, Turkish people from leaving with their Orthodox brethren. You can keep your liturgy as long as you say the Filioque originally, and then they conceded on that too.
It always seems to be the posture of the Catholic Church with the Eastern Orthodox is like kind of like a wiser older parent. Right. Where like the kid is kind of like, no, we will not do, they're kind of like nipping at the heels, and the parent's like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm going to do for you. and I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to keep trying to get you back on board. And then the Orthodox are always kind of like stomping their feet and like slamming their doors and going back to their room. It's just like, it's like we're just trying to be understanding and patient and like see where they're coming from.
Right. With IQ gate type issues.
Yeah. So somebody just gave $2, so thank you. Amazing podcast, well needed, from Ann Nelica. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm hoping that a lot of people have that response, because it's like I've done countless shows on this over the last 8 years, however long I've been making 2 to 3 streams per week. It's been a while now. I've been doing this for 2 to 3 streams per week since 2018. So I guess just 7 plus years now. Yeah. Feels like longer. 2.5 streams a week, depending on some weeks it's 2, some it's 3. And I've done several shows with Taylor Marshall, several shows when I had co-hosts on this channel, Chris Plants and my brother, several shows on my own. Every once in a while, I'll update on any of these given topics: Fatima, Bella Dodd, Sankt Gallen, Good Success, La Salette, St. Michael Prayer, Alta Vendita. I'll do a kind of revamp show. This is the first one where I'm trying to tie it all together and to answer a kind of call of a question, which is like, you sound like a Sede, but you're not at all. You're not even SSPX. Well, here's how. And it came up just because I saw Fuentes struggling over this to articulate it to his younger audience. And I was like, maybe a lot of the younger audience just doesn't get it. And I don't think they do. So hopefully I can help to dispel some of the vagaries of post-20th century Catholicism.
McCare Maynard says, I really needed to hear this today. Thank you very much. And we had a follow-up from, I think, Abraham, and he said, didn't phrase the question that well. Always feel free. Let me put on the screen right now. If you have a question, you can always email Tim. Let me put it up here. Sorry, since you gave a super chat and we didn't get to fully answer your question, let me put that on the screen so maybe we can do that more thoroughly. Let me hide this. There we go. Email on the screen. So again, not trying to be super harsh or anything with the Eastern Orthodox, because we get along with quite many of them. I do not have any interest, desire, or curiosity to leave the Catholic Church at all.
Well, I'm not trying to be super harsh with anyone. Maybe that's a slight tonal shift from when I started doing this 7.5 years ago, but I don't want to be harsh with anyone. It's just a question of, it's a fact of a lot of this is IQ gate stuff, and people will be like, oh, how can you be anti-death penalty or pro-death penalty but anti-abortion? You're like, really simply, retardo. Like it's very an IQ gate, very comfortably, very with Loctite conceptual surety.
We're not like sweating bullets over here, even with all the corruption in the church. Like when I am like contemplating my faith or in prayer or in appreciation for my faith, I have a very comfortable and happy relation with my Catholic faith. I'm not like anxious or upset or threatened out of that relationship I have with my faith. And I think that does kind of surprise some of the Orthodox. Like, how could you feel that way with all this stuff going on? It's like you said, very comfortably, actually, very comfortably. Another super chat. How have you heard the government Stargate program? All humans have low levels of ESP. Could explain how the saints hear prayers in grace. Perfect nature.
Yeah. I've heard of it, and there's MK Ultra and lots of stuff evidencing that people who seem to know more than us do believe that this stuff is this weird electrical activity of the brain is borderline telepathic, and it's interesting. I don't know. I don't go too deep on that stuff, but
did you hear the one theory that humans actually glow? We have like a mild fluorescence to us. I saw some science thing on that, and I'm like, what?
It's interesting. And I have heard. I mean, there's so much in neurology and neuro. I mean, they kind of first learn it from neuropathology and neurosurgery and just the general science of neurology that suggests that it's like a 10, 12-year-old science in earnest. So what they know is strange. And insinuates a lot, but it can't really be unpacked yet. Okay. So hopefully this show helped you guys out. I want to do a really quick run through for locals only, and I encourage you to become a local supporter today on the Alta Vendita. I'm just gonna go through because we have kind of some stuff to do, but I do want to just run through some of the skeletal facts for my locals people, because I felt bad that I didn't include that in the kind of upper tier historical reasons to feel pretty confident with the claim that I made, the scalability of my view of ecclesiology on the Alta Vendita. I'm just going to run through and literally just read some stuff.
How do you spell that, Alta Vendita?
ALTA VENDITA.
Okay.
You know, the permanent instruction. Boy, we slept in today, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Okay. God bless you all. Deus Volt. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe. And we'll see you next week.